Coming up on The World Today. Public anger as French President Emmanuel Macron vows to make life difficult for the unvaccinated. More transmissible Omicron variant of COVID continues to drive case surges across the world. Plus, mayor's office stormed in Kazakhstan through protest. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. French President Emmanuel Macron has been accused of using divisive, vulgar language after he used a slang term to say he wanted to make life difficult for unvaccinated people. 3 months ahead of a presidential election, opponents of Mr. Macron said his words were unworthy of a president. MPs halted debate on a law barring the unvaccinated from much of public life. The session in the National Assembly was brought to a standstill for a second night running on Tuesday as opposition delegates complained about the president's language. The legislation is expected to be approved in a vote this week, but it has angered vaccine opponents, and several French MPs have said they have received death threats over the issue. In the meantime, the Omicron variant is driving record daily cases of coronavirus from the United States to Australia, adding to pressure on health services. Daily coronavirus infections in the Netherlands have soared to a record high of around 24,500 as officials confirmed that Omicron has become the dominant strain in the country. Israel's health ministry has also announced nearly 12,000 new coronavirus cases, the largest daily rise in infections since the beginning of the pandemic nearly 2 years ago. Here's more on the situation around the world on our COVID-19 Global Update.
Israel has changed its COVID-19 quarantine and testing policy in what the health ministry described as an effort to ensure continued protection for vulnerable populations from a surge in infections fueled by the Omicron variant. PCR tests will be earmarked for people aged 60 and over with weak immune systems, while those at lower risk will be checked with rapid antigen tests. The country has confirmed around 1.4 million infections since the start of the pandemic and more than 8,000 deaths. About 60% of its 9.4 million population are fully vaccinated. The United States has reported nearly 1 million new coronavirus infections, the highest daily tally on any country in the world, and nearly double the previous U.S. peak set a week ago. The number of hospitalized COVID-19 patients has risen nearly 50% in the past week and now exceeds 100,000, marking the first time that threshold has been reached in a year. Australia's daily COVID-19 cases has hit a record high for the third consecutive day, further straining hospital resources and testing facilities as public anger grew over the handling of a fast-moving Omicron outbreak. New COVID-19 cases in India has surged to 58,097 over the past 24 hours, a doubling of the daily tally over the past 4 days. Health experts have called for preparations to ensure hospitals are not overwhelmed by a new wave of patients. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has announced that the government will introduce a series of new measures to curb the spread of COVID-19. The new rules include a ban on flights from 8 countries for 2 weeks from January 8th, affecting Britain, the United States, Canada, Australia, Pakistan, Philippines, France and India. Singapore's COVID-19 task force says it expects the Omicron coronavirus variant to cause a bigger wave of infections than Delta and urges the country to prepare.
Yesterday alone, we reported 438 Omicron cases. Hence, it is very likely that we will see an Omicron wave quite soon, with local and international evidence indicating that Omicron is more infectious compared to Delta. We must be mentally prepared that the Omicron wave may be greater than the Delta wave we had experienced before.
Over in Europe, British opposition Labour leader Keir Starmer has tested positive for COVID-19. He had been due to face Prime Minister Boris Johnson at a question and answer session in Parliament later today. Starmer previously tested positive for COVID-19 in October. Poland's President Andrzej Duda has tested positive for COVID-19. He had previously tested positive for COVID-19 in October 2020. The president's aide says he's been vaccinated 3 times against COVID-19 and is in isolation with no serious symptoms.
Well, let's focus a bit more on the situation in Israel now, as nearly 12,000 new coronavirus cases were reported over the past 24 hours, which is the largest daily rise in infections since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, nearly 4.3 million of Israel's 9.4 million inhabitants have received 3 shots of coronavirus vaccine. In recent days, authorities began administering 4th shots to at-risk groups. The VOA's Linda Gradstein is in Jerusalem. She joins us now for more on this. Linda, officials have been predicting a surge in cases in the country, but nearly 12,000 new cases. That's a record high for the country. Were officials prepared for such numbers so soon?
Well, yes, in some ways, but the health system hasn't quite caught up to it. The Israeli officials have been saying for the last week or so that they expect these kinds of numbers. Some have even talked about a maximum of 50,000 new infections a day. It's putting tens of thousands of people into quarantine. Almost everybody I know, has been quarantined in the past few days, and it's expected to only increase. So it's not a surprise, but I do think that the pace of this, 2 days ago, there were 6,000 infections a day. Now there are 12,000, and in another 2 days, there could be 25,000 new infections a day. So I think, Israel is still a pretty small country. The hospitals are full. You've got 3,000 flu patients who've been put in the hospital. At the same time, in Israel, what they're seeing is that the number of serious cases from the Omicron variant is quite small. So yes, there are a huge number of cases, but at least so far the hospitals are not being overwhelmed.
Okay, speak to us about the new measures in place. We know officials have earmarked COVID PCRs for vulnerable groups and have also expanded home testing. Can we expect any more measures in the coming days?
Well, these new measures haven't even taken effect yet, and they're really confusing. I think people are very confused. If you are not over 60 and you're vaccinated, you're supposed to take a home test. If that home test is positive, you're then supposed to go take an antigen test. If you're unvaccinated, you're supposed to be automatically in quarantine. I think people still don't quite understand what these new rules are. At the same time, the testing centers were just not managing under the load of numbers of people. People were waiting 2-3 hours for a test. Standing in the lines, some people had masks and some people didn't have masks. So I think it's an effort to try to take some pressure off the testing centers, but I'm not convinced that it's going to work. There's also seems to be a shortage of the home test kits. I know people have been kind of running around and trying to buy these home test kits to have them at home. Schools in most cases are still open, but more and more classes are being shut down. So the school's open, but the kids are starting to learn on Zoom. So there's a lot of confusion and, of course, a lot of frustration with the situation.
But one thing official has been pushing is the 4th vaccine dose for people in high-risk groups. We heard from the Prime Minister yesterday saying it does boost antibodies against the virus. But what's the response been like? Are people trooping out to take the 4th dose of the vaccine?
Well, so far it's only for people over 60, and it just started this week. And yes, that population is coming out to get the vaccine. I know quite a few people who were trying to get appointments and are posting pictures of themselves getting the 4th vaccine. And, you have to remember that's an older population that perhaps feels more vulnerable. However, if Israel decides to extend this fourth booster shot, as they did with the third booster shot, first to people over 50, then over 40, then over 30, I'm not convinced that people will be quite as anxious to get it. There is a certain amount of vaccine fatigue. People say, we're just going to get, new vaccines every 6 months. That's going to be, and for how long will that continue? So yes, in this first stage, there definitely is interest, but it's a vulnerable population. It's people who are either immunocompromised or health workers or people over 60. However, I doubt that the kind of pace and the kind of interest is going to keep up. We certainly saw that when Israel extended the third booster shot, older people got it, younger people less so, and even children's vaccinations. Quite a few parents have been very hesitant to get vaccinations for their children.
All right, then, Linda, we'll have to wait and see how everything pans out. Thank you so much for the update.
Thank you.
And in Britain, which is also seeing record high COVID cases, secondary school children have been asked to wear masks in classrooms and take a COVID-19 test on arrival as they return from the Christmas break. But despite rising Omicron infections, officials say data does not suggest further restrictions are needed at the moment.
It's back to school for students in England, but the new requirement has been introduced for secondary school children. They have to wear masks in classrooms and take a COVID-19 test on arrival. With daily infection numbers at record highs and people who test positive required to isolate for at least 7 days, schools and other public services were facing disruption from staff shortages. But the government has said that face-to-face teaching would continue to be the expected norm and exams would go ahead as planned this month.
Ian Jones, great news, you're good to go, you can go back to lessons.
At the Beaches Head Academy in Stoke-on-Trent, only 3 teachers had called in sick with COVID-19 on Tuesday, and teaching could proceed normally. But for at least one of the Beaches Head students, however, the school day was cut short by a positive lateral flow test result.
Only 3 staff have called in with COVID this morning, so we were able to manage the school normally with that. That's no problem at all. Difficult last term. We had a number of illnesses, COVID and non-COVID related illnesses. About a third of the children were off with COVID related issues, so that was difficult. But we managed, we kept school open, we kept all the children in lessons, and we aim to do the same thing again this term.
On Tuesday, Britain's daily coronavirus caseload crossed 200,000 for the first time. Prime Minister Boris Johnson says this is a moment for utmost caution and the weeks ahead will be challenging, but he has so far resisted another lockdown.
Together with the Plan B measures that we introduced before Christmas, we have a chance to ride out this Omicron wave without shutting down our country once again. We can keep our schools and our businesses open, and we can find a way to live with this virus. But the weeks ahead are going to be challenging, both here in the UK and across the world. There is no escaping the fact that some services will be disrupted by staff absences.
But there's some good news. While hospital admissions have risen since mid-December, they've not tracked the trajectory of daily cases, possibly reflecting the impact of vaccines and booster shots, the likely lower severity of Omicron, and the time lag in people going into hospitals.
And now Australia's Prime Minister says tennis star Novak Djokovic will be refused entry to the country unless he provides evidence that he cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons. Scott Morrison says the tennis player could be on the next plane home if the proof was insufficient. The world #1 is due to play in the Australian Open after being exempted from vaccination rules.
Well, my view is that any individual seeking to enter Australia must comply with our border requirements. Now, Novak Djokovic, when he arrives in Australia, I'm not quite sure when he's going to turn up, but I don't think it's too far away, he has to, because if he's not vaccinated, he must provide acceptable proof that he cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons and to be able to access the same travel arrangements as fully vaccinated travellers. So we await his presentation and what evidence he provides to support that. If that evidence is insufficient, then he won't be treated any different to anyone else and he'll be on the next plane home. So there should be no special rules for Novak Djokovic at all, none whatsoever.
There's also come on the program. And twins born 15 minutes apart arrive in different years, one in 2021 and another in 2022. More details in a moment. You stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. The EU, United States, Norway and Britain are warning the Sudanese military against appointing its own prime minister, saying it would risk plunging the nation into conflict. The countries say they would not support a prime minister or government appointed without the involvement of a broad range of civilian stakeholders. The former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok resigned on Sunday amid a political deadlock and widespread protests resulting from October's military coup.
Another day, another round of protest. The people of Sudan are not backing down on their demand for a return to civilian rule. The security forces also are not stopping the use of force. They once again fired tear gas to disperse large crowds demonstrating against military rule and recent protester deaths across the capital, Khartoum, and neighboring cities. The demonstrations, the 13th round of protests since a military coup on October the 25th, 2021, were called by a local resistance committee in Khartoum's twin city of Omdurman in response to the killing of several protesters there on Thursday, December the 30th, 2021, and Sunday, January the 2nd, 2022. In Khartoum, security forces, some armed with sticks and guns, were seen fighting running battles with scattered protesters in an area of open ground as they approached the palace. They fired rounds of tear gas and stun grenades, some of which protesters tried to throw back. The protest comes 2 days after the resignation of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who had served from 2019 until the coup and was reinstated on November the 21st in an agreement with the military widely rejected by protesters. While some Sudanese citizens lamented the resignation of the country's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok following a continued political deadlock, others say they will continue the path of political changes against the country's military rulers.
Such a great loss for the country. Whoever is to come next will not be able to do what he has done. The things he has done were not easy and not simple. He gave so much for the country.
To be honest, the Sudanese people do not want Hamdok to resign, but the military council pressured him into doing so. I wish him well, and I hope someone better will come along. These people, we do not want them. The Sudanese people do not want them, and hopefully their time too will soon come.
Hamdok had served as Prime Minister for more than 2 years under a power-sharing arrangement between civilians and the army until the military toppled him in October, accusing politicians of hostility to the army. Under an agreement to partly reverse that coup, he returned to lead a government of technocrats intended to serve until elections in 2023. But his deal with the military was opposed by key political parties and by the protest movement that had brought down Bashir. Hamdok said he would only stay in his post only if he could mobilize political support. But on January the 2nd, in a televised address, he said he had been unable to unite polarized factions sufficiently to be able to move forward with the transition.
Now, anti-government protesters in Kazakhstan's main city, Almaty, have stormed the mayor's office on a second day of protest over fuel prices. Thousands of people took to the streets today despite a state of emergency in some areas. On Tuesday, the president dismissed the government and said lower fuel prices would be restored.
Kazakhstan declared emergencies in the capital. main city and provinces after demonstrators stormed and torched public buildings, the worst unrest for more than a decade. Police fired stunt grenades and tear gas at a crowd of several thousand protesters, but were unable to stop them from entering the mayor's office. Protests erupted in several Kazakh cities and towns after the authorities lifted price caps on liquefied petroleum gas, a popular car fuel, allowing prices to surge. Many Kazakhs have converted their cars to run on LPG because of its low cost.
Yeah.
Loud explosions could be heard in downtown Almaty in the early hours of Wednesday after police ejected hundreds of protesters from the city's main square using tear gas and stunt grenades. The Interior Ministry said that in addition to Almaty, government buildings were attacked in the southern city of Shymkent and Taraz overnight, with 95 police officers wounded in clashes. Police have detained more than 200 people. Kazakhstan is a tightly controlled country which cultivates an image of political stability, helping it attract hundreds of billions of dollars of foreign investment in its oil and metals industries over 3 decades of independence.
Дорогие соотечественники, вновь обращаюсь к вам.
President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has declared a state of emergency and has also issued a decree accepting the government's resignation amid the unrest. The nation's Deputy Prime Minister, Alikan Smilov, has been appointed as the new Prime Minister on an interim basis.
South Korea's President Moon Jae-in has called for dialogue at a groundbreaking ceremony for a rail line near the border with North Korea, hours after the North fired a suspected ballistic missile off its east coast. The presumed missile was fired in an inland location of the east coast and into the sea. The first launch since October underscored leader Kim Jong-un's New Year vow to bolster the military to counter an unstable international situation. A few hours later, Moon visited the South Korean east coastal city of Gyeongsang, where he called the new rail line a stepping stone for peace and regional balance on the Korean peninsula. In remarks at the ceremony, Moon acknowledged the launch raised concerns of tensions and damage to inter-Korean relations and called for North Korea to make sincere efforts for dialogue. And finally on the program, despite being born just 15 minutes apart, twins Aylin and Alfredo Sojilo have completely different birthdays, with each baby arriving in the world on a different day, month and year. At 11:45 p.m. on New Year's Eve 2021, Fatima Madrigal gave birth to her son Alfredo in California. 15 minutes later, as the clock struck midnight and hospital staff rang in the new year, Aylin arrived. Their mom says it came as a huge surprise, and for now, the twins will celebrate their birthdays on the same day. According to the hospital where the twins were born, there are about 120,000 twin births in the U.S. every year, but twins with different birthdays are rare. Some estimate the chance of twins being born in different years as 1 in 2 million.
I didn't realize that I thought we're gonna be born in the same year. I did not know that we're gonna be born in a different year. It was a surprise. Yes, I was kind of shocked because twins don't run in my family nor in my partner's family. So we were really surprised that we got blessed with 2 babies. And it's a boy and a girl. So we are complete. Well, I'll explain it to them the best I can. But if they wanna, when they're older, if they wanna, celebrate their birthdays like different years, that's up to them. But right now that they're small and they're with me, they're gonna celebrate their birthday together.
Oh, what a lovely surprise. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shaboale. Bye for now.